Okay, does anyone remember Brand New Animal? No? You know, that one furry show made by Studio Trigger about the girl that transforms into a furry, has to live in a city with a bunch of other furries. No? It's that show with the one dude with all the sexy fan art. So now you know what I'm talking about, you perverts. Anyway, I've mentioned before that I have a complicated relationship with this series like I do another one, but that's super ultra mega not the point. I actually like talking about the things that I like rather than complaining. So instead of talking about how this show had so much promise, beginning with the world divided and able to actually have those complex conversations around things like discrimination, and how there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for dealing with minorities, only to stumble and crack its stupid fucking skull open to have one of the most mid-endings I've ever seen. No, that's not what we're doing here. I'm here to actually talk about what I like. And what I like about Brand New Animal is this, the motherfucking baseball episode. Yeah, I know it sounds a little weird, but this baseball episode is the best in Brand New Animal and one of the best I've ever seen in anime. But let me give you some context for this whole shebang. Brand New Animal premiered in 2020 as a Netflix exclusive anime. The entire thing has that usual Studio Trigger charm. Wacky animation, bombastic expressions, funny characters, and everything tuned up to 11 for a grand climactic finale. The main protagonist of this show is Michiru Kagemori, this little twink right here. Wait, can women be twinks? Whatever, she's a twink. She's like Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul, except her life updates aren't just, it got worse. She was a normal girl, blah 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 happened, and now she's a furry, I mean a beastman, and runs away to Anima City, the only haven for beastmen like her. The story is semi-episodic, having smaller per-episode plots that add up to something big at the end. But all of those plots focus on Anima City since the setting itself is the main source of conflict in the major question. That's because the overarching plot of Brand New Animal can be surmised as man versus society. To explain what I mean, there are 9 kinds of conflict in literature that extend to most stories humans have ever told. Using popular anime as an example, Dragon Ball is man versus man. What happens when two unmovable wills clash? Naruto can be understood as man versus nature, as Naruto endeavors to end the cycle of hatred. Bleach is man versus self, as Ichigo is only allowed to grow in strength and overcome his foes by understanding himself and his lineage better. Keep in mind, I'm oversimplifying these stories a bit because most, if not every, well-told story will use other kinds of conflict to build into their larger narrative. Like One Piece, each arc can be described as man versus man, but on a larger scale, it's man versus society. Luffy's desire for freedom brushes up against those that seek to restrain him and others, most often those in power. The man versus man focus of Ines Lobby is Luffy versus Lucci, but it's also Luffy fighting against the world government. This is Luffy fighting against the alliance of 170 countries, the society that they forged that says someone like Robin doesn't deserve to live. Brand New Animal does something similar, but brought down to a scale that fits a single season anime. Instead of its arcs being man versus man, B&A brings it down to singular episodes before expanding out into the true conflict towards the end, man versus society. The driving concept behind Brand New Animal is that of an oppressed minority, and that idea lends itself well to man versus society. And Brand New Animal does a lot of it right in the first episodes, focusing on the way characters brush up against the system. Like, the nature of Anima City being the only haven for beastmen is subtly the problem. Like in episode 4, we see the problem of having a single isolated city. It prevents integration and understanding between humans and beastmen. Like yes, Anima City is a refuge for beastmen, but it's also self-segregation. Humans and beastmen will never learn to live together if you always keep them separate. But the idea of man versus society comes to a head halfway, well not really halfway, it's episode 5 of 12, with a baseball episode. The central conflict of the episode is that in Anima City, baseball isn't played as a game, it's just a means to gamble. All that matters is winning and getting that dough. As such, there's gratuitous amounts of violence involved in every game. From lying, cheating, blackmail, and actual murder, anything goes, and that's exactly where these bears fit in. They're the Glass Joe, the guy who's safe to bet against, but all of that changes when Michiru gets involved. Being the outsider, she doesn't quite vibe with Anima City's conception of baseball. This eventually puts her at odds with her coach, who's in on the whole thing, because in Anima City, people aren't interested in the game but making money. It's the only way beastmen can make a living through baseball. I'm gonna play the clip again because it's actually very important. It's not the only way he can make money through baseball, but beastmen. Because at the next game, we see the deuteragonist Shiro examine a few personal effects of the coach and learn his backstory. His name is Dante, and he's the furry Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was the guy who integrated baseball, right? Hang on, I'm black, I should know this. Yeah, furry Jackie Robinson. He originally was a professional baseball player for the Odaibo baseball team, but faced constant abuse from not only other players but his teammates and even the fans. This leads to him snapping and attacking people on the field, which explains how he ended up like this. But seeing Michiru disregard the gambling and actually get everyone in the stadium into the sport reignites his passion. At the end of everything, Dante rejects the money, deciding to play baseball for the sport and not for the cash. Shiro even agrees to let the bad guys go, so long as they stop the gambling. And it all manages to make this episode work so well. But before we get into the nitty-gritty writing techniques that make this episode work, let's examine it on a surface level to see what makes it so entertaining. Baseball serves as a great way to have wacky and weird zany action between our characters without a usual physical fight. The animators really get to flex their muscles, pulling out all sorts of things to show the violence in ever more absurd ways. Seeing Michiru fight to overcome her obstacles and eventually rubbing off on Dante is wonderful too. And the ending is full of satisfaction. Yes, Michiru and her team lost the game, but Michiru accomplished her ultimate goal: to teach Anima City the joy of a simple game for sport. And it's the turning point for our protagonist, seeing her insert herself into the plot instead of having the plot happen to her. But understanding the writing techniques used to make all of this work shines a light on just how well written this episode is. A key part to getting your audience invested in your story are their emotions. Do they feel great when the protagonist succeeds? Do they feel hurt when the protagonist fails? Or are they just unable to look away from the world's most fucked up car crash? The emotional core is there so your audience isn't just watching a story, but feeling it too. This baseball episode has two good emotional cores, both centered around the same thing: the simple desire to play a game for fun rather than money. Michiru takes on the role of the outsider underdog and is the viewpoint from which the audience is introduced to the issue. By virtue of the story being from their perspective, the audience is already primed to root for her and sympathize with her problems. To compare this to another trigger anime, Michiru is like Ryoko from Kill la Kill, the outsider who has come to tear it all down. The issue with that kind of protagonist is that, well, they are an outsider. They have no connection to the setting. They have no personal stakes in the conflict. And if we're meant to view the story from their perspective, empathize with the protagonist, then the lack of personal stakes for the protagonist equals a lack of personal stakes for the audience. That's why in Kill la Kill, one of the first things we learn about Ryoko is her dead dad. It gives Ryoko a reason to stay in the setting and insert herself into the conflict while giving the audience a reason to empathize with Ryoko and care about her struggle. But Ryoko's dad isn't a character. We don't meet him, so whatever empathy can be earned from that is limited, and that's exactly why Mako is introduced so early. Unlike Ryoko's dead dad, we actually get to meet Mako and her family. We want them to have a better life, and thus we want Ryoko to succeed in tearing down the system. Jackie and the Bear team have a very similar role to Mako's dad, giving Michiru a reason to stay. You may think they're like Mako, but the similarities, like living in the slums, are superficial. Just like with Ryoko's dad, the empathy they gain is limited. Despite actually being characters, it's held back by them being comic relief. All their suffering is framed as a joke. Which is exactly why it's someone else's story that's taken seriously to give that second emotional core. Dante, the baseball coach from Brand New Animal, is the Mako to Michiru's Ryoko. In the baseball episode, Michiru is the outsider who takes issue with the way things are, just like Ryoko. But it's Dante's story that gives us a reason to want to see Michiru succeed, just like Mako's family does for Ryoko. We want to see Dante shake off the shackles and get back to his old self that loved baseball by the end of the story. And what a good story Dante's is! Immediately, there's a lot to love here as far as stories about minorities and social issues go. These topics are sensitive, to say the least, and it's important for writers to keep in mind that not everyone will read your metaphor in the same way. In fact, that's another issue I have with the ending, but once more, that's not the point of this video. I'll get to making a video about my problems with the ending eventually, but next week I have a video about Ruri Dragon planned. So subscribe if you're interested. Back to what I was saying, the way Dante's story is handled is very important. To the show's benefit, it doesn't put him at fault for cracking under the pressure, rather he's just another victim. It's not his fault he couldn't be strong in the face of the abuse because he shouldn't have been facing the abuse to begin with. It's the fact that Dante is always being framed as the victim that avoids any bad readings of the story and aids in the emotional core. Even when he starts being the antagonist and actively sidelining Michiru to try and lose, it comes after we see him being tortured by the money brokers. And after that, we see his backstory, reinforcing the idea of Dante being a victim and reinforcing the emotional core. Because the audience will want to see Dante stop being life's punching bag and finally break free. But it also serves to direct us to the actual overarching antagonist of the story. Because Dante's abusers and the deadly baseball players aren't really characters. We don't even learn their names because they don't matter. They're the equivalent of taxi drivers in New York. Just a thing that you expect to be there because, as we learn, that's just the way things work in Anima City. They are henchmen on behalf of the series' actual antagonist, society. Like I said, the central conflict of Brand New Animal is man versus society, and despite it being quite episodic, it also wears its conflict on its sleeve. From the start, we get hints that Michiru and Shiro are only treating symptoms and not the disease itself. The second episode literally has Michiru save a bunch of kids from traffickers. The traffickers being a man versus man conflict, but it's made clear from lines like this that things are deeper. Living as a woman in the world of beast men. This line makes it clear their motivations for being traffickers, what pushed them to do this was not a person, but the world they live in. And as the show continues and we get a better look at Anima City and the way the world works, the conflict shifts. The story initially seems like one about maintaining the status quo, as Michiru and Shiro fight those who commit crimes. But as we and Michiru get to see more of Anima City, from the crimes to the concessions made to allow it to exist, we're left to wonder if it should exist at all. The early portions of the show do a lot to focus on this, with Shiro representing the establishment. He's like Batman, doing whatever he can to maintain the city's fragile status quo. And other characters often represent those society leaves behind, like Pinga in episode 7. He's a wandering albatross beastman, a kind of migratory bird. However, the current laws restricting where one can fly just doesn't work for a migratory bird, so he resorts to terrorism to tear down a system that just doesn't work for him. And then there's episode 4, where the underlying issue is the ignorance created by having a segregated society where beastmen live away from humans. That's because, while the conflict in the episode might be personal, on a grander scale, the enemy isn't something that can be fought with your fist. Or at least, that's how things should go. No, hold yourself back, we're not talking about the ending. As the episodes go on and Michiru finds herself on the side of the establishment, the series asks her if she's on the right side. And this baseball episode works so well not only because it has a solid emotional story in Dante, but it also shows that our characters are learning and growing with each episode. I think this episode is also placed really well at around the halfway point of the series. This isn't the first episode. These characters have already begun their journey and they are beginning to show it. Michiru is beginning to shake her passivity, no longer being a witness to the things going on, but a participant. While she doesn't insert herself into the problem at the beginning when she's forced onto the team, she does take charge of it at the end, deciding to show Anima City the love of baseball of her own volition rather than being forced. And Shiro is allowed to show how he's changed too. He's the hard defender of the law, the one who represents the establishment, and yet he's beginning to soften. He goes from this...
You've already lost the pride of being a beast, so you have no need for the pride of a deer.
No! Not my antlers! Please stop! Anything but my antlers!
To this.
And here I am generously giving it back to its owner. Or do you think I should turn the money over to the police?
So why'd you bring it back?
I placed a bet as well, 'cause I love baseball.
The man who ardently fights for the status quo has decided to let things slide and bend the rules because he's learning of the flaws in the system. This episode just works, man! The plot is engaging on a surface and deeper thematic level. The zany action, the heartfelt story, and the subtle display that our protagonists are learning and growing is why this is the best episode in Brand New Animal and one of the best in anime. And that's where I'm ending this. I'll get to making that video on my problems with the ending at some point before the heat death of the universe, but don't hold your breath. And now it is time for our Patreon shoutouts. For our 3 stars, we have special thanks to 87 Werehog, Deku, Zora Chow, Choron, Garen Lafay, Dragon Yara, Anon RC, Lightning Shadow, and Kayun. For 4 stars, we have Miki Moon and Miko, the Greedy Bears. And for our Super D-Tuber special 5-star shoutouts, we have... First, Vanilla Flower, the Runaway Raccoon. Then, Poor Mage, the Dolphin's Daydream. Followed by Hodari Lion, the Human Scapegoat. Next, Sky King 64, the Rabid Wolf. And finally, Mahagasaur, the Beastly City. Thank you for watching, do be sure to like and subscribe, and as always, this is Rose Fury signing out.